And we'll get underway. And welcome everybody to Marche Madness 2021. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you being a part of it. As far as rules when it comes to Zoom, it's a small enough group that we can definitely, I don't need to mute everybody and just be talking the whole time or anything like that. You are welcome to chime in with questions or comments about the wine. Just be respectful of not trying to talk over anybody. We will, move through everything at a good pace. But at any point, if I'm saying something you have questions about, just feel free to let me know, and we'll slow down and back up. It's 3 wines tonight, so it shouldn't take us too long. But it's really exciting to get underway with these wines and taste these wines. They're all very unique wines from the Marche. Some of you I know are very familiar with this tasting. You've been here in years past at Bergamot Alley when we had this tasting every year where we did all the wines at once. This is definitely a new format for us, obviously, just as it is everybody in the world to be tasting on Zoom. So doing 3 wines a week seemed like a pretty sustainable option. So hopefully it's a good way to take care of things. So just to give you guys an idea, we've had a lot of questions about how the bracket sheets work and how that's going to end up, coming into play. The whole idea, if you're not familiar with Marche Madness in general, Marche Madness in general, is the sheets look like this. And as we go through the weeks and as you take tasting notes on the different wines, so this week, obviously, we're doing the number 4, the Pecorino, and then the Villeligi Aleatico and the Lacrima d'Amore d'Alba from Luigi Giusti. As we go through, take notes as we go, and then you fill out what you think is the better wine out of the groups. So, for example, each week we'll pin 2 against each other, tonight being the Lacrima and the Aleatico, and you fill in right here which one you think is the better wine. Which one do you like more? And we gave you that kind of outline of writing out hearts and stars on your tasting notes. That's a way that I've always approached it. There's a million different ways that people approach how they taste wines and how they score wines. To me, hearts and stars is a great way to do it. If it's 3 stars, is a really great wine. Maybe I don't love it as much, so maybe it's 2 hearts, or it's 3 hearts, even though it's maybe it's in a messed up wine. It's got flaw or whatever, but for something about it you really love, and you do 3 hearts and 1 star. Whatever it is, it's a good way to keep track, because as we go further, you're going to have to kind of remember what you loved about these wines and how much you loved the wine. So in this case, after tonight, you might fill out that blank spot right next to Lacrima and Aleatico and decide, I like the Lacrima better, or I like the Aleatico better. But then keep your notes for the Pecorino, because after we taste the 2 wines, the 5 and 12, the Biancalela or the Bianchello and the Albanella, then you have to figure out, did I like that one better than those 2? And then you have to decide at the end of the day, as it goes down towards the finals, to decide the winner. And then when you turn in those brackets, what we're going to do is compile all the brackets, and then we'll figure out the winner, and the winner gets another one of these tastings. And I promise I won't screw up the password on that one.
An obvious question.
Yes.
Why didn't you just do each quadrant per week? Why are you skipping across and having wines from 2 different quadrants?
That's a very good question. The reason being is for the whole idea of making it a little bit more interesting as far as tasting. Because we had to break it up in this way, we wanted to make sure you either had 1 white and 2 reds per tasting, or 2 whites and 1 red. So as many times as I flip-flopped them around and tried to make it work that way, no matter what, there was always going to be some sort of disconnect. The whole idea is that you're going to have to come up with a cohesive feeling on which wines you think are better anyway, and you're going to have to kind of make some of those decisions after the fact blind. So I figured this is a better way to kind of go through it and sort of practice, taking your notes and figuring out which wines you like better, instead of tasting 3 like wines every single time, to try to mix it up so you're actually having a little bit of a comprehensive tasting each time. But Kevin, trust me, I poured over that a couple of times and tried to figure out what's the best way. But I think this is going to be a fun way to do it, because again, at least at this sitting now, instead of having 3 reds open, you've got a white and 2 reds, and vice versa. Next week we'll do 2 whites and 1 red. So yeah, it was the idea was to do it the other way as well, but hopefully this works out a little bit better, just so for the tasting experience each time.
Sure thing.
But a very good question, of course. Um, so who here is not familiar with the Marche region at all? Are you, with Italian wine? The Marche region is one of my very favorite regions in Italy. Actually, is by far my favorite region in Italy. It is the opposite coast of Tuscany, which is always, I say, it's kind of the opposite of Tuscany in a lot of different ways. I'll show you here on the screen now. Here is the here's the map. There's Italy, of course, and then as we zoom in, you get an idea of where Marche is. Marche is that whole Adriatic coast area, and those are all the wineries that we're going to be tasting. So this is, to me, the most picturesque, beautiful, untouched area of Italy, especially compared to Tuscany, where obviously that is everybody's favorite tourist zone. I highly recommend the next time you take a trip to Italy that you take a trip to Marche, because it is very under tourists. It's absolutely stunning. The wines, as you'll discover, are absolutely beautiful, and the food is top notch. There's an incredible amount of Michelin star restaurants and a lot of incredible cuisine. There's an incredible amount of fresh raw seafood. They do a lot of crudo, a lot of basically just sushi straight out of the Adriatic Sea, which is incredible, and the wines go perfectly well with it. So it's to me one of the most undiscovered but fantastic regions that's worth checking out. And today the wines that we're going to do are this one here, the Villeligi. This one's the Lacrima d'Amore d'Alba, and then down here on the coastline from Fermo is the Pecorino, which we're going to start with now. So, cheers, everybody. Salud. Good to see you guys. Thank you again.
Salud. Cheers.
And so the Pecorino grape, the Marche wines are most famous for their white wines, for sure. And the Pecorino grape has become one of the most popular wines or up-and-coming grape varieties. The Verdicchio is the main white grape variety from Marche, very well established, very important grape variety for Italy. But Pecorino is now coming up as sort of the second most important white grape variety for the Marche region. It's interesting because as long as Verdicchio has been there, and in true form of Italian wine, Verdicchio was mistaken for a long time and mixed up with Trebbiano. Trebbiano is kind of everywhere throughout Italy. There's lots of different versions of Trebbiano. Trebbiano can be sometimes wonderful and transcendent, but is often very, very one-dimensional and boring, where Verdicchio actually has a lot more to say. But for a long time, Verdicchio was made very, very simply. It was made very inexpensively. It came to the States in the shape of a fish bottle, and it was like, $5 on the shelf. And there's still some of those old fish bottle Verdicchios that you can get in Italy for sure. But Pecorino has only come around in the last 30 years or so. It was a grape variety that was kind of hidden in the hills by an old winemaker that was kind of holding on to the grape variety, and the local producers. Coche Garfoni actually is one of the people who is credited for bringing the grape variety back to life, but he had tried to seek around the Marche and find something that actually fit his terroir better than Verdicchio. And Pecorino is really, really become popular down in the southern part of the Marche and along the coastline. And there's certainly a reason for that. It's a little bit warmer down there, a little bit more of the Adriatic climate, and Verdicchio tends to go a little bit better in the cooler areas. And it's just a little bit more mineral driven, and a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more perfect for seafood. And it's got a lot of sort of grassy herbaceousness. It doesn't have the weight that Verdicchio has, but it is a really, really beautiful grape that you're going to learn more of. And in fact, I've drank a lot of different Pecorinos from Marche, and this is a producer that's just recently been brought onto the country, and I was just wowed by it right away. I just love this wine. It's saline, it's crisp, it's very, very herbaceous, but it's floral as well, and just really, really pretty. Any thoughts on this? Everybody liking this wine?
Yeah, it's good. Delicious.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
It's a little, honestly, especially since we had a slight delay, it's a little too easy to drink on night when you have 3 bottles of wine. But other than that,
Fair enough. That's definitely going to be a challenge, I hope.
Oh,
But it's the acidity on there is not searing. It's not you know, super laser beam kind of wine. It is definitely more about the texture. It's got a dry mouthfeel, and it's not you know, it's not, it doesn't draw all the water out of your mouth, but it leaves you with this nice kind of crispy crunchiness to it, which I really, really like. And again, it almost reminds me of, like, it's got a little bit of like a sherry quality to it. There's a little bit of mint, there's a little bit of like green pistachio and honey to it. It's kind of all over the map, but I just really, really think this is a phenomenal example of the grape variety.
What are the soils in this vineyard?
So
roughly?
it's a good question. I will show you actually a good picture of the area, because this down this area, what they call is marine clay. So it's basically it's white clay. I mean, just like decomposed limestone and white clay, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty compact, but high, very low in nutrients and very, very high in minerality. I'll show you some pictures real quick of the area.
Sounds like the opposite of California entirely.
Yes, that it is.
And the wine, I mean, it's interesting you said sherry, but I also kind of get a little almost like a cool climate Chardonnay thing there. Like it's got a little rich golden tones, but the acid is there and it's got weight and body. I mean, am I a little kind of grasping at straws, or do you feel a little the same way? Anyone?
No, that's fair for sure. So here's the idea. This is when I say white clay, this is as white clay as it gets. So that's literally the hillsides, these sort of, you know, broken clay area. So it's bright white. It's in the rolling hills just off the coast. So when you look at, there's the coastline. Adriatic coast is you know, very, very calm, not a lot of waves. They don't have a big beachhead. There's only one area, which we'll get to next week, or actually 2 weeks from now, that actually has big limestone cliffs. But the rest of it is kind of unspectacular. It's very, very flat and very, very beautiful, tranquil, soft. And then, you know, as you go inland from there, you've got the classic rolling hills of Marche, where they have these you know, castle top towns. Macerata is this city right here, and that's right nearby where these grapes are grown. But this is the type soil, which is just a very, very bright white clay. Again, as you said, very opposite of California in the fact that, you know, very nutrient poor, and very, very high in minerality.
Hey, Kevin, how is this aged?
This is all in stainless. This is, you know, a stainless steel. This doesn't see any oak. This doesn't do, you know, no winemaking tricks on this one. It's very, very straightforward. They pick the grapes and you know, press off. They don't do, I think actually they do a little bit of skin contact on here, but it's not like, you know, extended maceration. They treat this in a very, very, you know, straightforward way, and not trying to, you know, they don't leave it on the lees or anything like that, or trying to, you know, expand the wine at all. This is just sort of the natural fermentation and the natural taste of the grape variety.
It's so interesting because the alcohol is really high, right? Like that's one of the things we were just looking at.
It doesn't, yeah, surprisingly, doesn't feel that way.
Doesn't feel like it at all.
Well, I mean, 13.5 is kind of like the catch-all for all Italian wines. I think that you know, they're a little less, and they're allowed to be a little bit less, you know, straightforward and honest on their wines. I think 13.5 is kind of a catch-all. And for white grapes, yeah, as long as it's got the body, it's got the acidity, it's got all that texture to it, then, you know, you're not going to feel that the wine is, you know, highly alcoholic. So yeah, it's, I mean, 13.5 is probably about average for a lot of the wines that you're going to get there.
Does that have something to do with the taxation level in the United States as well? Wines.
Yes. Yeah. yeah, there's definitely a level in which you pay more if you're above the alcohol level for sure. So they try and keep it under there, but it's also, Italian white wines are definitely going to be a little bit less high in alcohol than most California wines anyway, just because of the nature of the style that the winemaker and when they pick and the heat as well. So the ripeness on these wines, generally don't push the envelope. In some areas they do, and certainly south of the Marche, if you follow down the coastline, down into Abruzzo and Puglia, you get some bigger, wider wines, and you get some riper grapes, and they make very balanced wines, but they're going to be higher in alcohol for sure.
All the albums you have, which one would you play with this wine?
That's a good question. Let's see. What would you play with Pecorino? What's a good seaside coastal album in my repertoire? I don't know. I'm thinking something from Elton John. I'm thinking maybe, I don't know. That's a good question. I gotta dig on that for a little while. I haven't done any album pairings with this yet. Any other thoughts about this wine? Do we love this wine? Is this the kind of white wine that we're looking for?
Yes, it is. At first, I thought it was a Chardonnay, but I was wrong at first.
Yeah, I mean,
Strawberry notes with a little vibrant peach, and I was surprised at how smooth it was as a new wine drinker.
Yeah, no, that's to Pedro's point. It does have some, Chardonnay qualities to it. It does have some weight, some texture to it that I can see that.
Saline and crisp.
It is saline. It's definitely a little bit salty, and I love wines like this that have a little bit of salt to them. Make some great food pairing wines for sure.
Yeah, that's a perfect note for that. Personally, I think that's what sells that as is saline and crisp.
Saline and crisp. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of what I think of as like a fermented honey. And that was what hit me right in the nose immediately. And I know that sounds like a strange combination, but that was where I was feeling.
It's not. I mean, I could see. I've definitely used that descriptor before, but that it's like mead. Like fermented honey is that mead quality to it. And in the notes
that's where it is. Thank you. Yes.
There we go.
I appreciate that.
Nice.
I had written in my notes a kiss of confection, and I had wrote saltwater taffy and honey nougat, and that's right on. So it's got that kind of. Which is funny because, you think of those sort of weighty things out of, again, bigger, rounder, voluptuous wines, just tightens up. And I think it's that balance of the saltiness with that, richness it makes it kind of fun. And again, that's where I started saying something along the lines of sherry. It kind of, brings that out to it. So
I think you're right, Kevin, like that when you're talking about sherry or like an influence of maybe not necessarily oak, but if you notice on the finish, after you swallow the wine, the tannins almost at the front of your palate, like around your teeth, are almost kind of pulling the saliva away, where normally you feel the acidity from the back. Here you're feeling like a drying quality that I almost associate with, like I said, tannin. Is Pecorino thicker skinned, or we said maybe a touch of skin contact? I'm not picking up phenolics, but I think is it richness in the fruit and that drying quality that's there? Because you don't get that normally on a lot of white wines. It's more acid driven. This has a different kind of texture to it.
You're absolutely right. And that's what I was trying to allude to, is that Pecorino is kind of known for this. It has this texture, and it's not phenolic. You're right. And when we talk about, for those of you who might not know what that means, skin contact whites is when they start fermenting white wines a little bit more like red wines, and the tannins that you get, that grip that you get from red wines, is then associated and transferred into a white wine, which we're not accustomed to. Now with Pecorino, it's definitely known for having that sort of chewy texture that gives you a little bit more tannic kind of feel to it. And it can be quite herbaceousness, and that's what a lot of people associate to it. This one's a little bit prettier, a little bit more floral than herbaceous. But just to give you an idea, for those of you who know our Sarah and I's sort of silliness with our world, is that we kind of have created what we call grape characters. That are, sort of descriptors of the grape variety. And just to give you an idea of precisely what you're saying, that actually makes it, sort of typical for this variety, Pedro. here's a picture of what we characterized as what Pecorino is all about, and it is all about that chewy, kind of quality to it. And there's fruit, but that's sort of secondary. It's a little bit more of a different textured wine than most, which is why all of a sudden this wine has been this grape variety has been turning heads, and more people are growing it. Again, we're talking about within the last 20 years that this has been propagated. Pecorino really wasn't recognized as a thing, at the turn of the century. So this is all very, very new. Pecorino is coming on, and these winemakers are just now experimenting on what it actually tastes like and how it feels. And it does have this dimension to it that is a little bit tannic, a little bit grippy, a little bit crunchy, a little bit, that earthy, which is not common qualities that you expect out of just a grape variety, a white wine grape variety, if you're not doing any sort of manipulation to it. So it's really unique in that way. And every time I get a chance to taste Pecorino, I'm always fascinated to see what it's going to taste like, because there's still a huge learning curve with the grape variety, as popular as it's becoming with folks like us who work with these wines and import these wines and whatnot. But other than that, where else are people really excited about Pecorino? It's not that big a thing. But if you're into wines from Abruzzo and Marche, then you've heard of this, and it's a very neat new toy that winemakers are pulling out and figuring out how to work with it and what to do with it.
Does the graphic help you anymore with the Elton John song?
Yeah. No, the graphic does not. I don't know any Elton John songs that have sheep in them. I'm not sure.
Probably
Bully, bully.
Yeah,
Bully,
right. So there we have. There's Pecorino. Yes. Wait, let me pour Sarah some. She hasn't even had some yet. Jeez.
Hi, everybody.
Come on, Kevin.
Hi, Sarah.
I know. What a terrible person I am, right? So that's Pecorino. So there's our number one wine. We got through it, and it's done well. I think hopefully everybody has enjoyed that. And again, to your point, Kevin and Karen, it's going to be hard to remember how much do I like this versus the other wines. But that's going to be the whole challenge of this and that's why I was kind of encouraging some sort of a method like the Hearts and Stars, where you're sort of figuring out like, okay, this was pretty special to me. And, but again, it's always subjective, and it depends on, what you've eaten that night and everything like that. So it is going to be tough to pit these against each other as we go along. But this really stood out as a great wine for me. So I have a good feeling about this wine moving forward in the brackets, but we'll see what happens. All right, let's move on to wine number 2. Wine number 2, the two reds that we have are similar grape varieties in that they're in the same family as a red muscat or black muscat, they say. So they are extraordinarily aromatic grape varieties. Vernaccia is the grape that we're going to try next, and this is the Villeligi Vernaccia. And this is a unique one. There isn't a lot of Vernaccia out there, and the Vernaccia that's out there, it's taken a while for them to really actually figure out what it is. So Vernaccia is what they call it, but they've isolated the DNA, the structure of it, and realized that it's and identified it as Aleatico. Now Aleatico also has a few different synonym names and different grape varieties called Aleatico. There's a lot of grape varieties called Vernaccia, and it just in form with everything Italian wine, it gets super confusing at this point. In the south, and we'll try a wine from here in one of the other brackets, is also called Vernaccia Nera, and that grape is actually different from this Aleatico grape. The Aleatico grape grows up in the north west corner of Marche, up in the hillsides, and that was sort of the I'll share some photos here real quick so you get an idea of where we're going. That was sort of the idea of the namesake of this tasting being associated with truffles. Is this is an area that is a stunning area up in the hillsides, and most people know the very expensive and beautiful truffles of Piedmont, but another hidden treasure of the Marche is that not only do they have an abundance of area that that grows black truffles, but they also grow the very, very rare and sought after white truffles. So this is the rolling hillsides. This is the Apennine Mountains that roll right down the center of Italy. So many of these wines are out on the coastline. And then as you get further in, boom, it goes straight up into the mountains, right, butted up against the border of Umbria, which is very famously all mountainous. It's an all landlocked region in central Italy. But this little growing region up in the northwest corner, you know, I'd like to say it's up and coming. Kind of it is. There's some good winemaking going on up there, but it's still pretty provincial, pretty isolated. This family has been doing it for a long time. In fact, they're the gentleman's great grandfather was the one who really propagated Aleatico as its own grape variety, and then they slowly sort of championed it until it finally got recognized that it's as its own grape variety and not Black Muscat and not Vernaccia Nera, but this own thing, which is Aleatico. So this is the Villeligi family. And you know, here's a picture of their winery, super small winery, very, very small production if we were to compare it for something around here. And again, the area, truffles. I mean, the truffle gold. I was absolutely floored to go there and see truffles that big. If you guys know the cost of white truffles, that thing's a honker. That's worth a lot of money right there. So it's a pretty amazing area, and again, it's a really neat area because you can go truffle hunting and go and dig those things out without having to pay an arm and a leg to do so like you would in Piedmont. So again, a grape like this variety, there are very few producers that work with it, although hopefully that's growing, and designating it as Aleatico. It's a very aromatic grape variety. Again, gives you that super floral, bright rose petal nose, not as distinct as Lacrima, which you'll see next, but a very, very pretty nose that is almost what we refer to as a perceived sweetness. You expect this wine to be sweet, but it's not. It's bone dry in the finish. It's very clean. It's got a pepperiness to it. It's got a lot of texture to it, but it's a very, very unique wine in that way that it has that very, very floral aspect to it, which is kind of to me, one of the more endearing things about some of the Marche Reds.
Kevin,
Mm-hmm.
It does not appear until I do a thing where I can see the side of the glass, the very tiny little bubbles. Is anybody else getting that from the bottom? Or because it's very, I mean, it fascinates me. At first I thought it was tartrates, but it's not. If I roll it down the side of the glass, you can actually see.
I'm not getting any on mine. Although
no, that's why I'm asking. It may be just a bottle thing.
It could be, but it's certainly not. I think you would know if it was because there's two reasons that where there's bubbles inside a wine where there really shouldn't be, right? There is a.
It's fascinating. That's all. It's just they don't. Well, they're actually. If I do now, I look at the top, I can see a few on the top, but not many.
Are you getting the sensation on your tongue though, like a spritzy?
Not really.
Oh, okay, no. Good. Okay.
No, that's why originally I thought, I tasted it when I was waiting, and I went, this is interesting, but I don't have that spritz feeling.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
The other thing is I am having beef tacos with black truffle potato chips for dinner when we finish tonight.
Well done. Well done. I like that. Fantastic.
I was really thinking about getting them now because I'm getting really hungry.
So yeah, with bubbles like that, you can sometimes get what's basically called like a trapped CO2 situation from wines that will cold stabilize their wines as opposed to having to use a lot of sulfur. And these guys they're not a natural wine, so I wouldn't expect that out of this wine, but they do use a little bit of sulfur, but minimal. And so you can get sometimes a trapped CO2 thing, but the good thing is that you're not getting the sensation on your tongue, because that can be unpleasant. Obviously the more flawed and unfortunate side of sometimes if you get a wine that's spritzy and isn't supposed to be, then that would also mean sometimes that it would be a secondary fermentation, which this wine should not be going through any secondary at all. There is, they obviously are very good at what they do. They're not leaving any residual sugar in this wine, specifically because if they did, it would be very evident. I think that like a wine like this, because it's so aromatic, because it's so unique and sort of fun and sort of flamboyant as a grape variety, if it were sweet, you would know it. You would like, oh, this is clawing. It wouldn't be as pleasant as it is, if that makes sense. Another thing that this reminds me of, which a lot of people kind of compare this to, is that it's got a lot of gamay qualities to it. It's got a little bit of that, like, you know, pepper, a little bit of that kind of pencil saving, like graphite kind of crunchiness to it. That's always a telltale sign of something like a gamay. And I think that's spot on. I mean, gamay doesn't normally get as sort of floral as this wine, but it does have a lot of that kind of very red fruit, very vibrant, very high acid crunchiness to it, texture to it, that I think is not dissimilar from wine like this.
So Kevin, it's funny. My notes have rose hips, sour cherry, reminds me of Cru Beaujolais with more fruit.
There you go.
And we're eating spicy salami, which we always pull the gamays with, the Cru Beaujolais mostly. And this holds up beautifully. Like it cuts right through the fat and the spice. It's a great wine for spice. Surprisingly, it's surprisingly good for spice, actually.
And on a side note, for rarity, it is one of the first times I have not found a varietal in this book.
Which book?
Native Wine Grapes of Italy.
Aleatico's not in there?
It's not in there.
I'm surprised by
How
that.
do you spell it? Wait. Let me. Is it on there? Okay.
I thought it was in there, but maybe not.
Well, possible it's just not in the index. Anyway, we'll let it skip.
Again, it is. It's under another. And if any of you other nerds out there, because anybody who has that book is definitely a nerd like me.
Oh yeah, it's in here. It's in here.
Where'd you find it?
Steven just can't read. It's in here. It's in here.
No, that's okay. No, but it doesn't have much about it. And that's the whole point, is that it's one of those grape varieties that for the longest time, again, considered Vernaccia Rossa di Pergola. And now, again, for the longest time, thought it was just a black muscat and it was used as a minor blending grape. It wasn't anything that anybody was propagating, but Francesco Tonelli, decided that, this was his family's land, and that he decided that he wanted to specifically focus on this grape, and replanted everything and established they actually basically established this whole area for it. So this family is, they're kind of ground zero for this grape variety. Just to give you an idea, there aren't that many. I mean, we're talking about a handful of other producers that have been working with it for any more than the last 5 or 10 years. So very, very rare amongst the even amongst the rare Italian wines. This is as rare as it gets. And if you so happen to have drank this wine earlier in the week and you tried to find a replacement for it, you can see the guilty parties pointing to each other. Who texted me today saying, I need to find a replacement for that wine. Yeah, you're not going to find it. It's pretty rare. It's hard to find. But
yeah, they pointed us some moonshine, and we are in Tennessee after all.
Right. They sent you to the local version of Aleatico, which is some moonshine.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Kevin, I know no one asked about the song, but for me, this is a rose from Concrete Tupac, because there's the florals are there, but there's like the stinky funk behind it too, which goes great. So the origin, there's some stank behind it, but the florals are really nice.
I like that. No, that's a very, very good song pairing. I love it. So these guys are pretty cool. Again, this is a tiny little winery, and they play with some other stuff. They do another local grape, which we'll have another example of, although a coastal example of, is the Bianchello di Matauro, another small grape variety, again, with Marche kind of drawing heads with, drawing attention with Verdicchio specifically. That's really the one grape that everybody's kind of looking at Marche for, because all of a sudden it's become just absolutely world-class. They've been making world-class wines for a long time, but they're just now kind of paying attention, the world stages, if you will. But these littler, smaller areas and smaller production wineries are experimenting with some cool stuff. And these guys up in the mountains, they've got a really cool cool climate pocket. It's kind of cold up there, and so they mess with some Riesling, which is really cool. They actually make some fairly nice Riesling. They make some method Champenois Chardonnay that they blend with a little bit of Verdicchio and make a method Champenois, which is, I would have been a bit of a doubter until I tried it at their winery, and I really liked it. It helps that Stefano, the winemaker, his wife's French, so she threw a little influence into that, but the potential up there is really great, and it's so kind of off the beaten path. It's pretty amazing. So you're talking about an area, if you guys are familiar with the country of San Marino, if we go back to the map real quick. Let me go to the map, excuse me. Okay, so here's the map of Marche, and the country of San Marino is up here to the north. And as you come down here, this is all mountainous area. This is the whole start of the Apennine Mountains. And it's just tucked into this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful valley that is again really, really untouched, and with mountains surrounding it. It's got a lot more sort of ancient soils, very different soils than the rest of Marche. It's not maritime at all. It's actually the one area where you won't find clay as the predominant soil. But there's some really interesting soils in this area. So the potential for incredible winemaking and these neat grape varieties is barely being scratched at this point. So it's really fun to try something as pretty and dynamic as this, a rare grape variety, again coming from an area that is just so off the beaten path, and such a small unthought of area for great wines, that what you're learning is pretty incredible.
Does that pen location show that it's in a valley or on top of a hill?
It's actually in a valley. It's in between a number of mountains. So you're just kind of coming up to the foothills of the Apennines.
This wine's kind of a chameleon. When you're smelling it, it's so primary, a little bit on the nose. It's like almost fermenting Syrah or Zin a little bit. And
I agree with the Syrah thing. When you have that Northern Rhone Syrah, that lavender, and pepper thing, that definitely has a lot of that for sure.
But there is that floral and that bright fruit tone that gives you almost not Pinot Noir, but gets you kind of between where we're going towards that Gamay thing. It's very interesting that it has a little bit of a chameleon kind of a thing, and it shows so many things, but there's this gracefulness across the palate. Can you describe you said this is in a pocket kind of going up into the hillsides, but can you describe like some of the weather in the area and relate it to things that we might know? Like this could be a lot like maybe Monterey, or this could be a lot like if you were near like Humboldt County or something like that, like for the layman who might not be able to relate it to what you're saying.
No, I mean, I would actually compare it a little bit more to something like Willamette, because you're butted up against this cold pocket. Now, again, it's going to be a little bit of an opposite version of it, because you're going to have, with Willamette, you have obviously all the cold air coming from the Pacific, and then kind of running through the valley and then being held by the mountain range there. This is sort of the opposite. You've got more of the warm air coming from the Adriatic that might keep it from being too cold, but you've got the cold air coming down from the mountains to the west of you. So as far as California, it would be hard for me to hard pressed to say anything that's kind of protected by mountain areas like that is, and where your cold air is basically kind of drifting over there, and then obviously they'll have an opposite wind coming from the Adriatic, which is going to be the warm breeze. So again, Willamette would be the first thing that comes to mind, because it's going to be this sort of entrenched little area that is got influence from both the sea and the mountains, and it's kind of keeps its own microclimate in that way. Does that make sense?
Kevin, can you show us the character drawing of this one?
I don't have the character drawing for this one, because we only did these characterizations for I think we did it for 36 different grape varieties, and this one is so kind of rare. It doesn't have a character, but I'll show you the next one. There is a character drawing for the next one, for Lacrima. But our hope is we are going to create a coloring book out of our little characters, and we would love to get the funding to do more, because we were really lucky to find this neat artist in Uruguay to help us with that artwork. And Sarah's an artist, and Sarah's an incredible sort of design mind. So I described the wine, and then she then translated that into art, and then and he did these drawings. They're really fun, and they help people understand what the grape variety is. We have not created one for Aleatico yet, unfortunately.
Oh, all right.
Sorry, we'll get there. Any other thoughts on this wine? I agree. I mean, again, that there is a little bit of a vein right in between Syrah and Gamay, which I love on that page. You're absolutely right.
Kevin, I like this wine. I like the freshness on the palate. And initially when I opened it, it had a little bit of reduction going on. And I think that sort of gave it this more gamey or kind of gunflint kind of edge to it. And since it's been in the glass, it's a little bit floral. It's got this red berry fruit, and just the freshness on the palate and the kind of mid-weight feel to it makes me really like it. It's just got a lot of energy and vitality to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that it got a little gamey. The reserves tend to go that way a little bit more. Hi, Lucas. The reserves tend to go a little bit more that way. So there's only a couple producers. This producer, and then if you look at the brackets, we'll on the opposite side, the Claudio Morelli, who makes it Bianchello. He's coastal, but he makes Aleatico as well, and his reserve, both of the reserves from them, and those are 2 out of the 4 examples that I've had out of these grapes, by the way, out of producers. I've only had 4 producers, and I drink a lot of Marche wine, so just to show you, but both of their reserves get that reductive quality, and they open up really well. They breathe really quickly. They get into those aromatics. This one I feel has far less, but you're right, it's there. But their reserve wine in a little bit of one puts it in new barrels, new French barrels, a little bit. They do about 30% new French barrels, and then the other ones they just do large Slovenian oak, just like their normal old barrels. But they do get reductive, and they do get a little funky, but it does add an extra dynamicy to the wine. So it doesn't, it's not just showing as what they thought it was, which was black muscat, just this floral, vibrant thing. It actually had some teeth to it. It has some backbone and some meatiness, which, that's what you're going to want when you've got a plate full of black truffles, straight from the ground, or some black truffle tacos as you're having tonight, Beth. So this should go well with that for sure.
Have you had this wine chilled? Only because I'm really enjoying it, but the end for me just like kind of goes as just a teeny bit like lifted in alcohol, and it's still delicious. Like it's great, but I think a little chill might mellow that vibe for me. And maybe mine's not cellar temperature, but it's not hot by any means. But I'm just curious, just like almost like a Beaujolais, you could throw a little bit cooler on it. Might be nice.
I don't know that I've thrown on ice before, but I had this fairly cool tonight when I opened it up, and it does help it out for sure. These vibrant, lighter style wines, it would do very well. Similar to a Cru Beaujolais, this would do very well chilled for sure.
One of the things that with both of these was the fact that because the color is so deep, I expected a much heavier wine.
Sure.
Because the color is very deep on both of these. It's not it's not very transparent when I, put my hand under it.
Right. When you think of something like when we start comparing it to like a Gamay or a Pinot, it doesn't have that very, very light color that you would expect out of those. It definitely has a dark pigmentation to it. You're absolutely right. This one, even more so, the next one, the Lacrima, which we'll get to next, it has a very deep, dark color, a very staining color, which you expect to be, a lot more concentrated, a lot more rich, but it's just the natural pigmentation of the grape variety is pretty intense for sure. All right. Now we know Aleatico. Good job, everyone. We're getting through this. I love this wine. I love the people. Again, I will extend this every time we do a tasting like this. I've been very fortunate to go back and forth to the Marche a number of times, and I just love these people, and they're so excited to have people come and visit them who know about their wines and are excited about their region. So anytime you want to take a trip out there, I'm more than happy to help you go visit some people and you know and help your experience, because there's some incredible stuff to witness out there.
So we can attest to that. Kevin gave us like 4 names and like 3 minutes, like, oh yeah, call this person and contact this person and they'll see you. And like, really, it was not like very difficult. Like, hi, we're in town. Like, great, come on over. Do you want to have lunch? Do you want to stay in our guest house? Would you like to? It's like, it's insane. It's, yeah, I mean, Kevin's name carries a lot of weight, and the area is so welcoming and so warm too. So yeah, we just bounced around and used Kevin's name. It was worth it.
I mean, that is the special thing about it. Is it is the ultimate Italian hospitality. There's no expectations. They're just excited that you're there, and they want to show you what they've got going on, and they want to tell you about these grape varieties. They want to tell you the history about it, because the history is so new. We're not talking, these Tuscan producers that have like, oh well, there's these long histories and it's incredible, and oh, here's the bill after all that. Like for these guys, they're just so happy you're there. They're so happy you're excited about their wines, about their region, and they just want to share it. And that makes the Italian experience very, very special. And there's few regions left that have that 100% authentically. I mean, it's still Italy, so you'll find that in a lot of places. But Marche is to me, that's step above in that regard. Okay, let's move on to the Luigi Giusti Lacrima. Talk about like the nicest person in the world and the most accommodating person in the world. We'll give you a quick pictures while we're doing pictures. These are pictures from not too long ago, a couple years ago, back when, again, I didn't have a giant burly black, beard and all scary mustache. But so Lacrima d'Amor d'Alba is one of my it's always been kind of one of my pet projects. It is a grape variety that is rare to this one little area of Marche. It is the most aromatic red grape variety I've ever come across. To me, one of the first things that'll jump out of the nose, when you're smelling the wine, it smells like bergamot, aka Earl Grey tea. That bergamot, which is a citrus, a very aromatic citrus from the Calabrian region in southern Italy. But it is the flavor component in Earl Grey. And it's just a very, very unique grape variety that I just absolutely adore, because it is versatile. This is Pier Giovanni Giusti, again, one of the most kind and wonderful people in the world. And, he was born into this family that his dad, basically took Lacrima and said, you know what, this is our local grape. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to treat it. And this is going to be the future of our land. And it is not an easy grape to grow. It is notoriously difficult. He is, one of the most kind gentlemen who's just, super excited to share his wines and see what you think, and make some just transcendently cool wines. And, we'll end with a little sunset here and sunset over the Lacrima vines, which to me is, poetry. I love that stuff. So, Lacrima d'Amor d'Alba is this tiny grape variety that is, the word lacrima, you may recognize. It means tear or teardrop. And there's lots of different sort of theories on why the grape is named that way. Sometimes they say that because they're very, very thin-skinned and temperamental grapes, that they kind of resemble the shape of the tears, that they'll actually kind of droop when they're at perfect ripeness and shape like a tear. Or it's also because of that fragile skin that any fluctuation, I mean, we talk about like, oh, there's some difficult challenges in vintages here. I mean, outside of fires, of course, we don't really have very, very strong challenges with our grape varieties here in California. Fires have become a whole new aspect naturally. But when it comes to a grape variety like this, if they all of a sudden get a warm spike at the wrong time, these grape varieties, specifically the Lacrima grapes, will actually break open and tear, and they'll lose overnight. They'll lose 60% of their crop from something like that. But it's also just this really important grape variety that producers like this and a handful of others, we're talking maybe a dozen truly different producers that are working with this grape and trying to bring it to the next level, that are making this wine and trying to do right by it and see what it can actually amount to. if you will. This is his base level Lacrima. And again, I mean, you could sit there and smell it all day long. It's just so floral. It's so aromatic. It's rose petals and bergamot. And, you know, that's why our business is called Bergamot Wine Company. And Bergamot Alley was basically based on this grape variety, because I just, you know, adore it. But it's not for everyone at first. I think a lot of people, I've poured this in restaurants over the years of working as an Italian wine sommelier, is that you pour this for someone, immediately the thoughts are, well, it's not going to go well with my food. I don't like things that smell like, you know, flowers. It's a little bit overwhelming for me. So there's immediate sort of pushback from an aromatic red like this, because it's just so unique. But to me, once you try it with food and actually, you know, get into it and realize that it's not just potpourri, that it has structure, that it has this kind of crunchy iodine to it. It has this sort of, you know, meaty backbone to it, that there's some really, really fun things to discover. And, you know, I think that besides the fruit and the flowers, there's a lot more to it. And Luigi Giusti makes some, Pier Giovanni Giusti makes some that he does, you know, he'll age some in oak, he'll play around with it quite a bit. But I think just his straightforward Lacrima, which is the one we're trying now in a great vintage, which 18 was a very good vintage for him, is just a really unique and transcendent wine. Is anybody off put by this, you know, effusive high aromatic wine? Is this something that you right away you're a little bit
No, right away. This was just immediately. This is big, bold, and I couldn't wait to taste it. Tasted it again when I was waiting, and I actually got hungry, so I went and got my black truffle.
Oh, good. Nicely done.
But yeah, I could drink this a lot.
I agree.
I could drink this a lot.
Same here, and the nose is lovely, and the pecorino is really opening up too on the nose right now.
Excellent.
Geranium,
Awesome.
the flower.
Kevin, I gotta ask,
Okay.
we've had this wine for years, knowing you and working at Bergamot. This is a particularly bright vintage. The acid's much higher. The fruit is less heavy across the palate.
Yep.
I would say it's like 20%, maybe 15 to 20% lighter and much more brighter, less viscous than other vintages. Is that just the year, or is he changing his style up, or is that just vintage variation?
It's definitely vintage variation. He doesn't do much to change, again, because this is such a temperamental grape to grow, and, you know, temperamental grape across the board. Because if you know, I've talked to him ad nauseum about, you know, different things that he may have tried in the past to try and figure out, you know, maybe different ways to get either, you know, because there are some producers that, and the next Lacrima we try in week 3 is a producer who specifically does some stuff in the wine in the cellar, where he tries to magnify the aromatics a little bit by using some carbonic maceration, where this is just straightforward. And you know, the one thing about Lacrima is you can get a very
That's it.
you can get a very bitter aspect to Lacrima. Sometimes it can get very sort of bitter, and that's the one thing they try and avoid. So he doesn't do much in the cellar that's going to change anything. It is all about the vintage, and because the grape is so absolutely fragile, if you will, it's a fragile grape and a finicky grape, that it's very vintage specific for sure. And I agree, this is a vintage that is a little bit brighter, a little bit less dense and aromatic, and a little bit more user friendly, if you will.
Is the alcohol normally? Well, this is 13. So is this a lighter alcohol than other vintages?
No, it's a good question. Actually, I bet if we look back and look at his bottles, I bet every vintage for the last 20 years probably says 13. So you never really.
That's my only question. When you start talking about different vintages, you know, it's like, okay, that's one of the things I would look at. That was all.
Sure. Even in warm vintages, they probably listed at 13, even if it's a little bit higher. But you know, again, they have a little bit more leeway in what they're allowed to kind of list it as sort of an average. So it's hard to say with Italian wine whether or not, you know, we're actually dealing something, you know, within a few points of 13. It could be a bit of a range, but a lot of these wineries just kind of say, "Oh, we've been 13% alcohol for years now." So it's a tough thing to say. So, but yeah, no, they're Pedro's right. We've had this wine over and over and over again over the years, and there are some times where it's very more, a little bit more highly aromatic, a little bit more intense, a little bit more jammy, and not as user friendly on food actually, because once you get to that a little bit more sappy nature to it, it can be a little bit more difficult. But then again, with his wines that he puts in oak, it's similar to something like a Barbera. Barbera is a grape variety with no natural tannins, and Lacrima would have the same thing, and it's a very high acid red, and it tends to absorb oak very quickly. So if you put it in 100% new oak, you would just taste nothing but oak. But he's played around with a formula where he makes some really nice oaked versions of this wine that age unbelievably well, which you wouldn't expect out of wine like this, that's high acid, fruit forward, and doesn't have sort of a natural structure to it. So there is cool potential behind making a little bit more serious a wine out of this than just this. But it is this is kind of a fun and perfectly pure example of the grape variety.
Hey Kevin,
Hey,
isn't
Kevin.
it kind of wine with such aromatics that it may get in the way of the flavor and the finish? Isn't that the danger when it's too highly aromatic?
I don't know that it gets in the way of the flavor. I mean, there's so much that aromatics add to your flavor, and it's a good point with a wine like this. You're absolutely right, because you get drawn into what it smells like, and then what are you actually tasting? Because you don't necessarily taste that potpourri floralness as much as you do smell it, right? To me, the palate is a little bit more like sour cherries. It's a little bit more like blueberry confit. There's a little bit of kind of wild thyme in there, so there's an herbal nature to it. It goes well, as you said, Andrea and Steve, it goes well with spicy salami. I mean, again, which is a perfect thing like this, but it goes back to that. It does have a little bit of tannin, but it's almost like a black tea tannin. So does the aromatic get in the way? I don't know. I think it adds to it, but I think it just depends on your initial reaction as you keep tasting it and keep getting your nose in there. I think it all just becomes one thing, where at first, yes, the aromatics are right in your face. And someone had said gardenia before, and that's an interesting floral note. I heard somebody say that, and gardenia is one of those. It's a trigger word for some people. It's one wine that you guys might be familiar with from a lot of different regions. Actually, is Gewürztraminer. A lot of people do not like Gewürztraminer, and they do not like that gardenia smell. It gets too much for them, and they don't enjoy the palate because of the aromatics. So to your point, that's a wine where aromatics actually, I think, get in the way of the palate. But is that a perceived block, or is that something that you just kind of get used to? I love Gewürztraminer, but yeah, I can see why a lot of people really are just turned off by the intense floral nature of it. And this would be, somewhat of a red equivalent in that way. But I think the texture makes up for those high aromatics, and it follows through. It doesn't just leave you with this it doesn't leave you with like a mouthful of rose petals and that's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, like Gewürztraminers.
Yeah, right.
I'm thinking of Russian River Valley Pinot Noir, very similar, super floral expression of the Pinot Noir, and I don't think that detracts, in my opinion, from being able to take it. I think that's similar here with this Lacrima for me.
Sure. Yeah. No, I could see that's a good parallel in the fact that, like, yeah, you want ideally you want the aromatics to absolutely, to complement what's going to follow through in the glass. But I can see with a wine like this, because this is so intense and because it's so sort of foreign in a way, it is a very unique wine. It does put some people off right away, that they just can't stand that overly potpourri rose petal thing. They, it reminds them of their grandmother, the smell of her purse or something like that. But it's to me it's a wine that stands up to its aromatics for sure.
Hey Kevin,
yeah,
to your point about the aromatics not adding or not getting in the way, I think actually with food, I would maybe have this as an aperitif wine in my mind right when I smell it, but we're actually having food right now, and it pairs incredible with food, and all the stuff in the palate really comes out. It matches with spice, like a little bit of that chili flake in the pasta we're having. and the aromatics match with the herbs in the food, and it kind of all comes together. So I mean, Italian wine and food, of course, but specifically with this one, it's really
that's
fun.
it's honestly you bring up a point that I feel like was as someone who is a little bit on a mission, a solo mission to expose this grape variety to more people, especially working at like A16 and Flour and Water, where I was working with a lot of great Italian food. This is not something that you would imagine is going to be, a wine pairing or a good food pairing wine. But it really is. It really is. It stands up to so many good fats. It stands up to great herbs. It stands up to lots of things that you just would never expect out of it. And that's what I think makes it that sort of next level kind of grape variety, is that it does actually show far better with food than you would expect. So here's our version of Lacrima. This is, I love this one. But there's a lot going on. Obviously, there's the Earl Grey tea, there's the blueberry sort of pie, there's the floral nature, there's the it has that sort of maraschino cherry thing to it. It's got the bergamot orange and strawberry. That's what this whole picture is depicting. With Lacrima is interesting. This area, they grow a lot of wild cherries, and one of the more famous things that comes out of Marche is actually not necessarily their dry wines as far as red wines, is also a dessert wine called Visciola. And Visciola is actually Lacrima. You can imagine this wine fermented with wild cherries and then done with a good amount of residual sugar. And so they actually co-ferment the cherries with the Lacrima, and it is absolutely intoxicating. I mean, you get, I get a little weak in the knees when I smell this wine, but you smell one of those sweet wines and it is just, it knocks your socks off. It's pretty cool stuff, Visciola. I mean, sweet wines aren't for everybody, but when you have one that is unique like that, and especially one of the rare moments in the viticultural world where they actually co-ferment with other fruit like cherries, it's a unique process and definitely a unique experience that's worth trying. Anybody want to admit to not liking this wine, thinking that it's a little bit too aromatic? Does it put somebody
Never.
off?
No.
Admit it. Admit it.
Hey, Kevin, I have a question. I saw that you have another Lacrima coming up. Like, is there, and I don't want to spoil any, like spoiler alert, but.
No, this is good to talk about.
So what, like, obviously you're putting two on here because there's some difference. Like, is there a difference in, like, what do you think is making the difference between the two? I'm curious, like, before we even taste the other one.
They are different, and this goes back to like how we designed the tastings. I wanted to make sure that we have a white and two reds as opposed to just pinning three reds against each other. But I separated those specifically for a reason. This Lacrima is, as we talked about, is very, very straightforward. It is this is what the juice tastes like. This is what the grapes taste like off the vine, and this is a very pure form of Lacrima. The next one that we're going to try, the Moretti Campi. Moretti Campi is, again, a very important house for Marche, a bigger production house than Pier Giovanni. Pier Giovanni just works with Lacrima. That's it. He has his tiny little cellar and only does that. Moretti Campi makes Verdicchio, makes Rosso Canero, makes a lot of different other wines, but has always been a big champion of Lacrima. And he has two Lacrimas. He has a very straightforward one, and then this is his sort of crew, if you will, the Orgiolo. And what he does is actually do a little bit of carbonic maceration in that one. He does a different style winemaking that expands the aromatics, makes it bigger, makes it juicier, makes it a little bit more pronounced. And this is his wine that wins, Tre Bicchieri awards every year, and kind of draws attention and draws a little bit more press than something like Luigi Giusti. Now, is one better than the other? That's for you to decide, and vintage after vintage, it depends on whether or not you like one better than the other. But the next one that we try is going to be a little bit bigger for sure. It's going to have broader shoulders. It's going to be much more voluptuous. It's going to have more, sort of blueberry pie and high toned, fruit. And it's going to just be a little bit more of a magnified version of what this is.
I think it's worthy to say that the lighter versions of La Crema can be very elegant and very pretty as well. I know we're going to ramp up. But on the other side, I remember when we were at Bergamot in the early years, there were a couple other La Cremas. La Crema, the this grape that came in that were a lighter and softer, little maybe earlier pick, where the acid was similar to this vintage and this year.
Yeah.
And those are much more elegant. I would say it would be comparable to someone making like 3 or 4 Pinot Noirs from the same area, where one would be richer and bolder, and one might be a little bit lighter than a couple like heavier handed, like maybe oak driven wines. But it shows itself very much in that elk for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, so when you compare it to something like, okay, when we drink California Pinots and we try so many in a row that are maybe doing very, very small amounts of different minutiae, different things with the grapes as far as picking earlier or maybe exposing it to a little bit more wood. This we're truly talking about, no joke, about a dozen producers who grow this grape, who are crazy enough to grow this grape because it's not easy to grow. It's not gonna help their retirement fund very well, that's for sure. It's not a big money maker, this one, as it like Pinot is. But when we're able to try them side by side, these producers are doing their best to find what is the best expression of Lacrima, and how many different ways can we play with it? Can we make a more extracted version? Can we put one on a little bit of wood? Can we do a little bit later pick for this? Or can we do a little bit earlier pick for this one? So yeah, when you try a bunch of them side by side, you do start noticing the differences on with the winemaker's preference for sure. But with these two, they're going to be, I think, fairly distinctly different from one another, and it's kind of how I chose the wines for this whole tasting. Is they're going to all stand out as distinctly different wines, and hopefully one will tantalize you a little bit more than the other, or you're going to appreciate one more than the other. But there's no doubt that stylistically, you're going to notice a difference with this wine very clearly between one producer and another, more so than you're going to notice between every single, the hundreds and hundreds of Pinot producers, say, in Russian River. This is, the 12 guys. They all sit together at lunch and talk about, oh, what's going on with your vintage. I mean, they literally have their meetings about what's going on with the grapes and how to solve their issues and how to move to growing things more organically. And again, with a grape variety like this, it is it's not easy to grow, so their challenges are constant. And they stand to lose a fair bit of their crop by making wrong decisions, here and there. It's also, it's a funny grape. There's a few of you who know this story. I years ago worked at a local winery and with some folks who were really into this grape variety as well as Verdicchio, and I can add a international grape smuggler to my my business card of things that I've done. But I brought some suitcase vines back of Lacrima, and we grew it here in Dry Creek Valley, and it was mixed success for sure. It did well. The wines were a little bit bitter for the first couple of years, but then they opened up and blossomed. Unfortunately, the winery lost patience in the growing challenges of the grapes and tore it out. But we got a few vintages out of it and gave it a shot, and it was it ended up being there was a couple good vintages. But I think it's one of those ones that when you're looking at your land and seeing what you're able to squeeze out of it and see if you can actually make a viable wine out of it, it's a tough one to truly look at and say, okay, this is a good idea. So they tried and I tried, but it didn't end up working. So
we loved that and got a case of their very last stuff before they ripped them out.
Did you? And have you had one recently?
Yeah.
And is it good?
It's fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There was a little bit of lack of patience there, and I love I'm sitting here not naming them as if it's a bad thing, but I love Mick to death, and he had a problem with it, saying that it was diseased, and there's a lot of growing issues where the leaves turn red very, very early, and that's a sign of a disease, and that's a problem. So he started doing a lot of selection massal and taking those ones out and then regrafting over. But you ask Pierre Giovanni Giusti, he's just like, no, actually my leaves turn red about 3 weeks before harvest, which is unheard of. It just doesn't happen. So it's just a nature of the grape, which is crazy.
Yeah. That picture you showed of him, his vineyard was red at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And it was, I think it was just after harvest and it had already fully turned. So it's a finicky grape, and I totally understand that, why. And I'm trying to think of the quote that let me see if I can. I think I wrote it down, but I quoted Pier Giovanni at one point because I asked him about, because when I got the vines from him. Oh yeah, so here it is. When I got the vines from him, he's just like, I wish you luck. I hope you guys are able to grow it. But he said there are other people who have asked asked for cuttings from me and have tried growing it. But his quote was, "It's an extremely loyal grape to its home and the people who have cared." So a good way of saying that it just does not grow well outside of this area for whatever reason. It's really susceptible to all kinds of issues, and that's why grapes like this have disappeared. And that's why there's hundreds of grape varieties that we're just now kind of learning about in Italy that have lost favor. They've ripped them out and put in something that was more commercially viable. But now the coolest thing about Italy is that everybody's starting to say, hey, like the Pecorino grape that we tried earlier, like that was all but gone in one person's backyard. And it took a few producers saying, let's try this again. And all of a sudden it's becoming a cool thing. Lacrima, I don't think Lacrima is going to become a hugely cool thing because it's so hard to grow. But you have these champions that are doing it and drawing enough attention that it's worth saving, and hopefully we get to keep drinking their wines over and over again. But I don't know if there's going to be a lot more people making Lacrima. I doubt it, but we'll see. And then there's also crazy people like Californians like Mick Unti and lots of other California producers that are really excited about grapes like this, and maybe we can finally have a Lacrima in California sometime soon too. But I can't stop drinking it. I love it. Okay, so nobody's admitting to hating it. That's good.
So we have both in our cellar too. We have the local one as well, and it's been delicious, especially when it has some time.
Yeah,
I will say like this. I mean, the Luigi Gusti though. I mean, he just kind of nails it. Like he doesn't get in the way of the grape. He doesn't try to overdo it. He doesn't like force it. It is a particularly elegant expression of this grape. And it does need food. I agree with Morgan left, I know, but it's way better with food. So if you're not liking it, grab something to snack on because
yeah, no, it does. It is surprisingly good with food, and it is a unique wine in that way where you don't expect it to. It doesn't fit all what you think are the normal characteristics of what a food wine would be, and then all of a sudden you pair it next to a spreadable salumi or something spicy or something like that, and it just does super well. So that's a very, very cool thing. And yes, Giusti he is very hands off, but that's his personality. He's just like, well, this is what we grow. I hope you like it. Where Marotti Compi's a little bit like, I'm going to make this more flashy. I'm going to make this more important a grape variety, which is why, they're going to be a little bit of a different wine to try when you get a chance to try that one in week 3, I believe. Yeah, week 3.
Must be why it's a number 3 seed.
What's that?
That must be why you place it as a number 3 seed on the.
Well, okay. So I didn't in the descriptions. It's a good point. In the descriptions, I wanted to make sure that I didn't try and put any extra importance on the seeding, as if like it's not like if you do follow NCAA basketball and you see a number 3 seed, you're like, oh well, this guy's gonna go far. But what I did was when we seeded them, I wanted a really classic example from a classic house of Verdicchio, a classic example of Montepulciano, a classic example of Pecorino, and a classic example of Lacrima. In so far as like these are the houses that get some recognition for what they do. So again, whatever you do, don't put any weight behind my seeding and say, oh well, it must be a better wine than the Pier Giovanni Giusti. That's not the case at all. This it's just going to be a different wine, but that is one that does get the press and the recognition. If you Google Lacrima, you're probably going to find a couple of articles about Marotti Compi and him getting Trebicchieri, as opposed to Pier Giovanni, who's this tiny little producer that's kind of passed down little farmer. So but it's a good point. That's probably why I seeded it, but don't let the seeding fool you, for sure.
Kevin, on that note, somehow we weren't added to the betting market. Like whatever sort of betting system we're using for this, we never got that email. So no, too much. Okay.
No, I love it. That's fantastic. I haven't put any odds on any of the wine yet. That's actually a really interesting point. Maybe that's next week's videos is getting out the giant chalkboard and start putting odds on the wines. I like it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's dangerous. That's definitely dangerous. Now you guys are definitely showing signs of, there you go. You guys are showing signs of having done this tasting a number of times in the past. So that's
Yeah, that's next level right there.
right.
It's true.
When
It's
you're
true.
ready to lay money down on one of the producers, then you're definitely showing that you're long in the tooth for Marche Madness for sure.
Well, we weren't saying this like money. We just said betting.
You need to move your operations to Nevada, obviously. Just right over the line.
There you go. There you go.
I love it.
I think is what we're in this
Seriously.
case.
Certainly not Healdsburg where we are. So there you go. Yeah.
Is there normally a betting line on it?
No, there isn't. But now there is.
That was the
We're ready.
I gave up my case of Williamsonian to do this.
That betting line was the term I was looking for. Thank you.
Oh my God,
All right,
that
well,
was
we
great.
got to make it worth your while, Beth. That's great. Oh,
Yeah, that was brilliant.
I'm gonna buy one. Okay, am I gonna do this again this year? No, I'll try this for a change. So
I love it. I love it.
and then
So-
you understand that I literally opened these bottles tonight, pour half of them into 375s. We'll put a temporary label on them. They will go back into storage.
Good job.
And then these will be what I will drink all week.
Good job. Well done.
So-
That you're a professional. You know how to do this. 'Cause I know you've been to our tastings before in Bergamot, and you know that's the much
But
more.
I've never done this before, so we'll have to think about a betting line. I had a late husband who I knew the over odds every day.
That's great. I love it. I'm gonna make you guys will I'll hold me to it. I will make odds for the next one for sure.
Well, but also Kevin.
But I don't want to sway anybody's votes though with my odds though, because you know when you start looking at the odds, you start saying, well, maybe that Aleatico, maybe it should go. You know, like it's gonna be. I don't want to sway anybody's vote.
It's true.
We'll
It's true.
We'll see.
At least Beth gave you the term, which is betting line. So that's the term we didn't have. So she gets.
No, but that's
Thank you.
okay. Go back to the helicopter because this is actually much nicer now. Maybe because I've had a lot more wine, but
You go, Beth.
Beth, I'm following you straight to Vegas after this.
Yeah, right, exactly. I love it. Going back to the wines right now is very important. I mean, as the Pecorino just opened up and warmed up, I'm just now tasting it again, and it's tasting beautifully. So yeah, revisiting everything is very, very highly encouraged for sure. But yeah, okay. So that's my homework for the week. My homework is to lay some odds down and throw some bets down. I love that idea. Some off-track wine betting. This is fantastic. Not legal, but that's okay. Or maybe online maybe Zoom has it's like an oasis of law away from the law.
Neither is smuggling grapes though, Kevin. So won't be the first time.
Melissa, I made sure I could say that online in that I can't be convicted after the fact. If they caught me in the actual airport, then I would have been in trouble. But
Okay, fair enough.
But
I
after the fact, I'm allowed to
once
admit.
brought some cuttings back from Sicily, from Mount Etna, and I was terrified.
You brought
that they were
Nerello
gonna
back?
Open my bag and find them.
Beth, how did you bring Nerello back? Are you kidding me? How did you end up in
Roll,
that?
though, unfortunately. Yeah, no, I was anyway, but they were in my suitcase. If they had opened it up, they would have found them.
That is hilarious. No, I tied mine to the outside of a bicycle, and to further the story, I used them as like basically I bought a handmade 1970s beautiful handmade Italian bike made in the Colnago factory, and I tied all the vines to the outside of the tires, the wheels. Because to me, hiding them in plain sight was the best way to do it. It just looked like packing material as opposed to try and, disguise them as something else, because I brought quite a bit of them back with Verdicchio and Lacrima. So they were attached to the tires as packing material. And then I get on the plane, and at the time, gosh, this was, I don't know, 14 years ago, when the volcano in Iceland erupted and interrupted all the travel in all of Europe. So I got on a plane and then quickly got rerouted to Germany, and my bike got rerouted to Lord knows where. And so I was in Frankfurt, taking a train back and forth, thankfully making the best out of a situation, taking the train back and forth to the Rhine, and having a wonderful time, and then got back to the States thinking there's no way that I'm going to get any of this. And then 2 weeks later, the bike arrived, And I called the Unti family, and I don't think I've ever seen George Unti so animated in his life. He was like, "Oh, okay, should we go pick him up? Should we do we?" You know, so he was very, very excited to have these vines. But it was those vines came through a heck of a gauntlet and a good story to get here for sure. All right, people. What do we think? Anybody want to cast votes yet?
Not yet.
Are they big fans? No. All right. We're not making any predictions quite yet. That's good.
Well, so for tonight, we're voting for the Luigi Goose.
Voting, betting on.
Betting on.
We're using the
betting
wrong
on.
language
Yes, sorry.
for
We're
market.
betting on the Luigi Goose team.
Absolutely, we're going all in.
Black and white for tonight. That's our current. Although
we may regret it.
No,
we got a long way to go.
Well, we're keeping notes of the Pecorino because it's not yet up for its bracket, so that's next week.
That's it. That's part of the intrigue, Kevin and Karen. That's that. I wanted to make it intriguing as we go. We don't want to just decide a corner all at once. Just like in March Madness, they don't all do it at once, right? They slowly fill it in from different angles. So, well, good. That's awesome stuff. I can't apologize more for how difficult the entrance to tonight was. I'm sorry that we thought we had it all dialed in and it all went pear-shaped. So thank you for being patient. And I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And we really look forward to next week and to getting through all these wines. And as this builds, it's going to get more and more fun. And at the very least, you've tasted some great wines and learned a little bit about my very favorite region in all of Italy. And the people there are just absolutely incredible. And the wines are pretty transcendent and need to be better recognized. So that's my job in this whole thing. So I really appreciate you guys having the interest in being patient with us. And next week, I promise we'll have the right password and we'll open up some really good wines. Next week, we're dealing with some real great coastal wines. Scuttling Scampi is the name of next week. We're doing the Bianchello, the Albanella, and the number 4, which is the and the number 2, which is the Le Terrazze Sassineri Montepulciano, which is incredible. Probably we've talked about Verdicchio being the number 1 grape and the number 1 focus for all of Italy, but it's a really fascinating, or I'm sorry, for all of Marche, but it's a really fascinating thing, and it's a little bit of an odd juxtaposition for Marche, is that all these white wines are grown up in the hillsides and in the clay and everywhere, and then the most important area for a very big burly grape variety like Montepulciano is coastal and straight limestone, which you would think that would be where the white wines are grown. But there's this anomaly of this very important DOCG of Montepulciano in this area. And there's nobody better than Antonio from Le Terrazze to showcase that wine. So we'll taste some really cool wines next week. And I thank you all very much. And you guys are amazing. And thanks for being interactive, and thanks for playing, and thanks for trying this out. And next week we'll be dialed in and we'll taste 3 more really great wines. And I thank you so much and have a wonderful night, and salute. We'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Grazie.
Thanks, Kevin. Grazie mille.
Grazie mille. That's right.
Buen borice.
Fingers up.
Hey, is that where George got his Montepulciano too?
You know, they got there. I don't think it came from I know specifically he looked for the Marche clone, because there are a couple clones of Montepulciano, and you know, if you're in the Marche and you ask them about Montepulciano, they're like, oh, it's a totally different grape variety than Abruzzo, which isn't true, of course, but they'll say that. But there are different clones, and there's one specific to Conero, and that's where George specifically they wanted that clone for their Montepulciano, and so far it's done really well for them. I mean, their wines are great. Yeah, and you know, the idea is that it's a tenser wine. It's not as, you know, big and voluptuous and giving. They grow the heck out of that grape down in Abruzzo with double pergola systems, and just, you know, the amount of tonnage per acre is unbelievable. But they still make some really great wine in Abruzzo. But in Marche, it's entirely different soils. It's an entirely different little microclimate, and the wines are much more, you know, they have a very different structure than the Abruzzese wines, for sure.
I think Uti gets some good tonnage on that Montepulciano too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it grows well. There's super fertile soil here. There's no reason why that wine wouldn't grow. The biggest problem they have is that it's a very late ripener. and more so than they ever thought it would be. So it hangs very, very late. And in years like last year, that's not a good thing. So, in some years that's been a really great thing. They can let it hang and it'll be great in Dry Creek because Dry Creek's lucky enough to be able to go for a good long time. But the Montepulciano that they have there, the biggest risk is that it takes a long time for it to be phenolically ripe.
Good to know. I'm a home winemaker. Maybe that can be my last one that I process next year if you'll sell me some.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that by all means, if you can find some Montepulciano, there should be more Montepulciano grown here. There should be more Vermentino grown here, which Mick and George do well here because it's prolific as can be. It's really unique, and I don't know if our whole 7% solution world is we're big fans of anybody in California working with different grape varieties, and we try and lift them up as much as we can because there's so much more of these things that should be grown here, and just see what happens in California. Maybe they won't work. Maybe Lacrima doesn't work here, and that's okay, but try it. Montepulciano absolutely works here. It works here really, really well. And maybe a warmer climate than or a warmer little pocket or a different pocket than Dry Creek, it might be a little bit less difficult as far as how long it has to ripen. But there's great potential for it here for sure.
Yeah, cool. Very good. Enjoyed it tonight. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. It was good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Cheers.